This podcast has been made possible with the support of Isuzu Ute Australia, a major national partner of the Royal Flying Doctor Service and also the sponsor of the Flying Doctor podcast series.
And then the pain started, this gnawing pain. I still have 12 kilometres to go. I got to, maybe an hour down the track. I sat down. I thought, wow, I feel like I'm in a bit of trouble now.
Just turn around as quickly as we can.
That blood pressure is not coming up.
Unload the patient.
Is it a big property?
Still breathing okay at the moment.
On a 493, understood, thank you. Put the stretcher back in, shut the door, off we go again.
This is the Flying Doctor podcast, and I'm your host, Lana Howarth. Each week we fly to rural and remote communities across Australia and hear the stories of real-life patients who've needed to call on the Royal Flying Doctor Service. There are some topics that are generally not spoken of, and they're considered taboo, and one of these is our bowels. Unless you're a 7-year-old boy who can get away with talking about poo and farts, the subject tends to get skirted around. Now, I'm sure we all know basic biology. The digestive system converts the foods that we eat into their simplest forms. The broken down food is then absorbed into the bloodstream through the small intestine, and the nutrients are carried to every single cell in the body. So we are in fact what we eat. What we put into our mouths has a direct correlation with our health. But sometimes things just go wrong. Australia has a high prevalence of inflammatory bowel disease, called IBD, with one of the highest rates in the world. Inflammatory bowel disease is a chronic condition that causes inflammation and swelling in the intestines. The inflammation is the body's immune system attacking healthy bowel cells. But unfortunately, the exact cause of inflammatory bowel disease is unknown. It's thought likely to be a combination of environmental and genetic factors. So here, at the beginning of 2025, in this first episode of Series 13 of the Flying Doctor podcast, we're going to shed some light on IBD. Veronica has kindly agreed to talk to her journey, and I hope this podcast helps to shine a light on the challenges that so many Australians suffer, and also help to educate the general public and make it easier to talk about our bowels. Hello, V.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Before we dive into the bowels of this interview, sorry, I just had to throw that one in. Let's start with you and your family. You're in your early 40s and you live in Bordertown, South Australia, which is near the Victorian state border and about 250 kilometres from Adelaide. Is that right?
I think it's a little more. It's closer to 300. Yeah, it's about 3 hours.
Have you always lived there?
No. Well, I grew up in a little town called Francis, which isn't so far from here. So I grew up in a farming family. My family were graziers, but went into cropping. And then from there, maybe in my early 20s, I went across to Kangaroo Island, spent some time there, and ended up coming back to the mainland where I met my husband.
And you're now there in Bordertown with 2 children?
Yeah, we have 2 little ones, 2 little girls who are 6 and 8.
And are you still working in the agricultural sector?
Kind of. I work in an oat milling facility. So producers will bring in their oats. There's a few other niche grains, and they're rolled and processed in this facility. And my role is actually in heavy vehicle compliance.
Making sure that everything keeps moving and doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, keeping our roads safe. There's a lot of laws around heavy vehicle compliance. So,
And what does your hubby do?
He works for a local John Deere dealership.
This is country people through and through.
Yes.
You couldn't get more country than this. That's great.
So he works, he's a diesel mechanic by trade. He also works in, precision ag. So he does a lot of the tech side of, or technology side of using, the big, big tractors and headers and sprayers and those types of machines. Yeah.
So what would a day in your life be normally with 2 girls? I guess they're at primary school now. So is it basically the standard shuffle of kids to school and work? Do you have a farm, actual property, or is it just a house?
We live in town, so it's so easy and so convenient. I can drop my kids off and be at work within 5 minutes. So drop them at school and be at work. Yeah, there's never a dull moment in our lives. The kids are involved in, sports and dance. And then in my spare time, I'm actually training for a big hike at the moment, and also volunteering with the Country Fire Service. So yeah, we have lots going on.
So you're part of the Rural Fire Service?
Yeah, the Country Fire Service in South Australia.
Again, thank you for agreeing to come and talk to me about your journey. Would you be able to tell me when you first experienced symptoms and what those symptoms were?
Looking back on it, I probably had symptoms for a very long time. I live an active life, and I was seeing a naturopath because I felt like I wasn't running on 6 cylinders. So I'd been seeing this naturopath for quite a number of years, and she kept saying to me, look, I think you're autoimmune. I think there's something going on. I don't know what it is, but we can see that there's something happening in your body. And I felt like my digestive system was working quite well. So I didn't have any of the symptoms that you might get with, say, IBS or anything like that. There was nothing that was out of the ordinary, but things like fatigue. And I went and saw my local GP, and she did a number of blood tests, and the inflammation markers came back. There was something going on, really high inflammation in my body. She wanted to do further testing. I sort of put it off and put it off and put it off and put it off until I started.
Oh, V, that's not a wise thing to do. Not following doctor's orders. Okay, go on.
She agreed too. There was something autoimmune going on. And then I won't say out of the blue, we knew something was going on, but I started having these episodes where I'd get this terrible bloating and vomiting, and it wouldn't last long. It would last a few hours, and then I'd be all back to normal, back to doing the things that I loved.
That's weird. I mean, did you think it was food poisoning or something? Like, what was your reasoning around what it could be?
I don't know. It was so strange, because then I would go another, month and a half or 2 months before the next episode, and it would happen again. And it continued to happen until I was eventually hospitalized with I think with IBD or Crohn's, they talk about having a flare where you have really active inflammation. And I want to call it a flare, but it's more like an episode. So I ended up in hospital with this terrible pain, shocking pain, and vomiting. And the nurses really encouraged me to actually look into it further at that point. And then I had quite a number of episodes again. And of course, waiting for a specialist appointment and then a referral for a colonoscopy
And you're in a remote area. Do you have to go to Adelaide for all of that? Like, I presume most of what you were needing is not right there local?
No, not really. We do have an X-ray machine. That's about it here. And they can't just use it at any time. I think the radiologist comes once a week or once a fortnight or something like that. So our nearest centres are Mount Gambier or Narracourt. Mount Gambier. Narracourt's an hour away. Or if I went to Adelaide, that's a 3-hour drive.
Right.
So I eventually got into the colorectal surgeon who did a colonoscopy, and straight away he found Crohn's in the last part of my small bowel.
Would you explain what Crohn's is?
It's an inflammatory bowel disease. So colitis also comes under that inflammatory bowel disease. Crohn's can affect any part of the digestive system, whereas colitis, usually it's just the large bowel. So when they found a large section of inflammation in the last part of my small bowel.
And how do they tell the difference between, what are they physically looking at when it comes to Crohn's?
I probably had Crohn's for a really, really long time without knowing it. And there'd been a lot of scar tissue build up in my small bowel. It's called a stricture. So there's a lot of scar tissue, a lot of inflammation, a lot of ulceration, that type of thing.
Right. So does that mean that the body's inflamed and ulcerates and is responding in an unusual way, and then is trying to heal itself and is then generating scar tissue, which is then sort of building on itself? So it's is that what the stricture is? Is it's getting more and more compounded?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So the section of bowel becomes thick. It's been described to me more recently. There's this fat wrapping. It's very common with Crohn's in that part of the bowel. So yeah, it's a very large sort of diseased mass almost.
So you went to see this, you got this colonoscopy and they say, oh gosh, this is what we found. Were you shocked? Was it a surprise to you?
No, no, it wasn't at that
point. You
point.
knew by then something was really wrong.
Yes, I'd spent a bit of I know they don't say use Dr. Google, but I used Dr. Google, and I had basically self-diagnosed myself.
It would be unusual for you not to have. I think that's a place where everybody first goes, just to answer questions. Did that colonoscopy then lead to you getting advice or getting assistance? Like, what happened from there?
Yes, so I was referred to a gastroenterologist, and I was put on a course of steroids as well, just to sort of really calm the inflammation. And I sort of laugh at that time too, because it was about the time of the Masters Games here in Bordertown. Bordertown was hosting the Masters Games, and I'd signed up for hockey and I'd signed up for the Masters Mile. And I hadn't really done much training because I'd been so unwell. But I turned up for this race after a few weeks on these steroids.
Yeah.
And I felt pretty good. And I played some really good hockey. I think we might have played 6 or 7 games of hockey over the weekend, plus this Masters Mile.
And you were in top form.
I was.
Thanks to the steroids.
Yeah, so I was referred to a gastroenterologist, but again, really difficult because he comes to visit Narracor every month. My symptoms were getting worse and worse. I was getting sicker and sicker.
Could you tell me what you were experiencing? Were you experiencing pain in your gut, or like what were you actually on a day-to-day basis struggling with?
Really interesting symptoms. So I would these pain episodes. So I'd get this terrible bloating and pain, like I can't describe it, just sort of even above the belly button, like upper tummy area.
Stomach, yeah.
Shocking pain. So at this point I was, starting to visit the local hospital. I was keeping count for a while. I have completely lost count of my visits to the hospital. It'd be more than 35 visits across a few hospitals around here for pain relief, anti-nausea relief. Sometimes I'd be admitted and put on a drip. Yeah, these episodes are becoming more and more frequent.
And this was when you'd already been diagnosed with IBS, or this was before?
Or IBD.
IBD, sorry.
Yeah, so I had been diagnosed. I'd been put on a couple of different medications, so immunosuppressant meds. The couple that I tried actually made me sicker than what the actual disease did. So it was a lot of trial and error. Also trialed different diets.
Did that make any difference?
No, not really. No, I tried quite a few. I put a lot of time and effort into really nourishing my bodies with different foods and, cutting out the gluten and the dairy, sugar, processed foods. None of that made a difference. I just could not stop this autoimmune response in my body. I also was then referred to the Royal Adelaide Hospital, the inflammatory bowel disease team. So it's a multidisciplinary team. They have a dietitian, a psychologist, they have the gastroenterologist. They can have these meetings where they can all get together and discuss, each of their patients and what treatment or what they can do going forward. So I found that was the start of, I felt a lot more supported, even having access to the IBD nurses. You can ring them on the hotline, and having them available was awesome.
You felt like you had a bit of a safety net.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And were they able to give you better coping strategies or day-to-day management of the disease?
It's a really tricky disease because I think, there's so many different forms of Crohn's. I mean, it can be anywhere in your body. Everybody has different symptoms, and it was a lot of trial and error with different medications. But it was a couple of years of this, trialing different medications and still couldn't quite get on top of it.
Right. What's the sort of prognosis that they give? Like when you get to that multidisciplinary team there in Adelaide and they're talking about you and where your IBD is and what's occurring, what sort of prognosis do they give you? Do they say, look, this is going to be something you battle with for the rest of your life, this is what you can anticipate or this is what you can expect over the course of the next several decades? Because you're in your 40s, you've got many years to go. What does life look like for somebody who has to spend another 40 or 50 or more years with Crohn's?
It's a good question. They aim to manage the disease.
Yeah.
That can be done through different types of medications, immunosuppressants. There's new drugs, the biologic drugs, or surgery.
Tell me what happened next, V.
Okay, so I'd had a couple of trips to the Royal Adelaide Hospital to see the gastroenterologist. I'd already had a couple of trips to the emergency there and had CT scans. I was prescribed a drug called methotrexate, which I would inject every week. And I thought I was in remission. So I set myself this goal of hiking the Grampians Peaks Trail, which is it's a 164-kilometre hike from the north to the south.
Sorry. Okay, yeah.
And it's called the Grampians Peaks. It's not walking around the base of the mountain. It's up and over every single peak. So I think it covers about 8,000 metres of elevation gain. I'd done most of the hike at that point.
And you were going by yourself?
I did the first half of the trip with a friend, and then I was going to continue on solo. So because I work almost full time and I have 2 children, I couldn't do the whole thing in one go. I had to sort of come and go a little bit to get it finished. But it was about this time a year ago, so January 2024.
Middle of summer.
But it was a nice cool day. I was watching the weather forecast. I had some leave, a really lovely cool day, and I thought, right, I'm going to take that opportunity to get another day of this hike done. It was a big day. It was about 20 kilometres, grade 5, which is the hardest hiking you can have, and I did that day solo. So I started out on Mount William, which is the highest peak in the Grampians, and it was about 8 degrees. And I remembered starting off the walk early in the morning. I estimated it was going to take 6 or 7 hours, and my husband was going to pick me up at the other end.
Yeah.
So it started off it was a cold day for the middle of January that had a lot of rain. So it was just beautiful up there. It was just stunning. Lots of cloud rolling in across the peaks. And I set off, and I'd had a bit of a fall. There was some slippery rocks. It's really rugged underfoot. It's a grade 5 hike, so there's lots of climbing and scrambling in there as well, and sometimes a bit of navigation required. But I slipped over and I'd given myself a bit of a corky in my thigh, and I just remember thinking, now I've come all this way to do this hike. I'm not going to give up now. I could have gone back and hitchhiked off the mountain or something like that. I knew if I was going to continue, I was committing to another, 18 or 19 kilometres in front of me. So I thought, no, I've come all this way, I'm going to do it. So I set off. I got a couple of hours in. I was really enjoying the hike a lot. Just stunning, just spectacular views, incredible country, and really quite remote. There's no way off the mountain. When you're on the mountain, you've got to commit.
Once you've started, you're all the way through to the end.
That's right. So I had some lunch and I sat down, and I thought, I'm not actually feeling so well. And, I was sitting in this beautiful picturesque place, this beautiful little creek, and I'd stopped to have something to eat, and I thought, I feel really unwell. And then the pain started. It's a really unique pain, this gnawing pain. It's like nothing else. I always carry a first aid kit. I had some pain meds in there. I had some endone and some other things, but I thought, look, that's probably not the wisest idea either, because I still have 12 kilometres to go.
Yeah, you need to be in a shape to be able to get out. Yeah. That's
right. I was feeling really unwell, so I tried a couple of Panadol, which didn't do anything. I just soldiered on. I continued on, and I got to, maybe an hour down the track. I sat down. I thought, wow, I feel like I'm in a bit of trouble now.
Were you at a point where you actually doubled over trying to walk along? At what sort of level was the pain?
I was feeling pretty miserable, very miserable would probably be the only way to describe it. It'd be the point where if I was at home, I would be taking myself to the local hospital for my morphine injection.
Right.
Which I would do quite often. But yeah, I was stuck on this mountain with very limited phone service. I was managed to get a text message to my husband to say, look, this walk is taking me a lot longer. I underestimated the amount of time. I didn't want to tell him I was unwell.
Right.
So I just continued on. I had no choice. I think I took an endone, just one, which can leave me feeling a little bit, what's the best way to describe it? Not alert.
Right.
I knew I couldn't take more than one. I had a couple of Panadol. I just thought, right, I'm just going to power on. So there was a point there where I had another rest, and I'm like, I did have a personal location beacon on me. I'm like, do I activate it or do I just keep going?
I'm so glad you had one with you. I mean, if we got to this point in the story and you said to me, I had no way of communicating to anybody or sending off a deep beacon, I was going to scold you. So I'm really glad you had one.
Yes, no, I definitely had one. And the crazy thing is, I did not see one other person on that walk that day. Not many people would take on a day like that in the middle of the summer.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of people would be very sensible and say this is not the right thing.
No, it was a cool day, but I didn't see one other soul on that whole stretch of the GPT. And the GPT is like quite a well-known through hike now. So quite often you bump into other walkers along the way. But yeah, I did not see one other soul that day. So yeah, I slowly made my way off the mountain. I just took my time. I was able to get a message to my husband say, look, I'm going to be running hours late. And yeah, I was in a fair bit of discomfort by the time I got off the hill.
And so did he just wait around for you? He must have been really worried.
Yeah, well, he had the two little girls. The meetup place was a place called Barra Huts. It's a gorgeous little campground and it's got this beautiful little river or creek running through it. And the girls were just happy playing in that. And yeah, they were just waiting there for me.
And what did you do when you got there? Did you say, look, I'm really not in a good state here? What did you tell your hubby?
I said, I'm having a Crohn's flare. I feel really unwell. I need to get back into bed. And of course we were camping, so we had to head back to it's hard because I've had so many hospitalizations, there would have been more than 35 trips to the hospital. I just always thought I was asking so much of my husband because he would, when I'd have to go to bed, or have a sleep in the afternoon, if I'm having a pain episode, he takes on the kids, the cooking, the cleaning, the whole lot. I asked so much of him when I was unwell. But yeah, we headed back to our campsite. I just took some pain meds and tried to sleep it off. If I had have been at home, I would have headed up to our local emergency department for some pain medication, but I was in a bad way. So we packed up camp, and because we came back over the border, so we'd been in the Grampians, so it's about 2 hours from home. And then we headed to the Royal Adelaide Hospital where my inflammatory bowel disease team were. Yeah.
Right. So he drove you. And does he leave the kids at home with family or something?
Thankfully, we have a lot of support in Bordertown. We've got his family here. So, yeah, they've just been incredible in supporting us with looking after the children.
It sounds like you have an amazing family, husband included, very much,
yes.
Very supportive. So they got you to Adelaide, and what did they say when you got to Adelaide?
Yeah, they did a CT scan to see where I was at, and of course this narrowing or stricture or, the disease was, I wasn't of course I was not in remission. I thought I had been in remission, but no. So yeah, from that point, what they recommended was changing my diet to what they call EEN, which is it's like a liquid protein formula.
Yeah. So it's basically like protein shakes.
Yeah, these little protein shakes in a little white bottle. I was shocked. I was horrified. I'd never heard of it before. They came in with this big slab of them, different flavors for me to try, so I could order which ones, whatever flavor I liked. And I could not believe that my entire nutrition would come out of this little bottle.
It's actually the amount of sensory pleasure that we get from eating. I have a family member at one point who went through cancer treatment, and as part of that cancer treatment, he was unable to eat by mouth for a long time. I think it was months, 6 months, 8 months, something like that. And so he was on a similar little thing where he was just, at that time he was being fed by a tube, and it was a similar thing. And I really got to see how important it is when your diet is reduced to just like a protein shake or something. It sort of seems to take a lot of the pleasure out of life, doesn't it?
It was really hard. Yeah, I came home with a couple of slabs of these protein drinks. It was calculated that my body weight was calculated I'd need 7 of these drinks a day. So I was still having to cook for my family. I have a beautiful veggie garden, and I cook with a lot of herbs and garlic and things like that. So I probably would have been fine if I didn't have to cook for my family. And I found that extremely challenging.
I don't know. I mean, that teases you even more. There was even a point, I'll tell you another personal story. So years and years ago, I actually had a major accident where I fainted onto a cement floor, not something that I would recommend anybody do. And I broke both my jaws and I ended up having to be wired shut for 8 weeks. I'm not kidding you, 8 weeks. And for somebody that talks and smiles a lot, like me, being wired shut was horrible. And I couldn't eat anything solid. All I could do was drink liquids. And so, it was often through one of those big, I don't know what they're called, but sort of like the horse needles, but without the needle, if you know what I mean, like one of those. And you'd feel it, it'd have soups and we'd have juices and we'd have shakes and stuff. And I tell you, after about the 3rd or 4th week, all I could think of was pizza. I would dream of pizza.
Yes, I would dream of food every night.
Yeah.
Yes.
This podcast has been made possible with the support of Isuzu Ute Australia. Have you seen any of our 7 large RFDS flight simulators as they move around Australia? Attending school, community or field days. Each is being towed by an Isuzu D-Max Ute, courtesy of Isuzu Ute Australia. Reliable vehicles are imperative in the harsh Australian outback, and the Isuzu D-Max and MUX vehicles are the perfect match for the long-distance heavy towing demands of these simulators right across Australia. To learn more, search Isuzu Ute online.
You were on this liquid diet for an extended period of time, and then finally the dietitian said, okay, we're going to add some solid foods. It was like chicken and potato and a few things like that. What happened at that point? Was your body able to take on those solids?
No. No, I was in such a bad way. I remember sitting here, I had another pain episode. I knew it was a really bad one. I just could not manage my pain at home. I rang the local hospital, and by now I feel like a frequent flyer. I know most of the nurses there. A few of them are my friends. We live in a very small town. The ward only has, I don't know, it probably has 8 or 10 beds or something. So it's a tiny hospital. And I rang in that night and there was a nurse answered the phone who I didn't know. And I explained to her that I was having this pain episode and I needed some urgent pain relief. I needed to see a doctor. And I know through the emergency services, there'd been something going on in the town. There was someone that was critically ill. So they were dealing with an emergency already.
Yeah.
But I also could not continue with that pain level that I was in and the nausea that I had at that time. I knew I was very sick. I knew I had either a partial bowel obstruction or a full bowel obstruction. I'd had quite a few partial bowel obstructions by this point. I knew that this was another one.
When we're talking about a bowel obstruction, we're simply talking about food getting caught in that sort of narrowed part of the bowel, correct? And then not being able to move forward. And so then essentially you've got a plug in the bowel that's not moving.
Yeah, that's right. So in my small bowel, the inflammation is just so great that nothing can move or very little can actually move through.
And that can be life-threatening, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. What can happen is you can get a ballooning above your bowel, and that's where bowel perforations can happen. Yeah, it's quite a serious complication.
So you called the hospital and you said, look, I'm not doing well. And she said, the nurse not knowing you, oh, look, we're a bit busy at the moment. What did you do?
I have a really great relationship with my GP and I have her personal number, bless her. So I did send her a text message, and because if your GP is not available, and we've only got a handful of GPs here, if your GP is not available, you go through, I think it's like a telehealth link where you meet with a doctor in Adelaide online. Thankfully, my doctor was... she's just always been so supportive. She's given me her personal number. If I'm in trouble, I can just send her a text message and she'll say, right, I'll sort it out with the hospital now. I'll get there 4 minutes later and she had, all the meds are drawn up, ready to go.
Right.
So I feel very blessed, living in a rural area like this, that I can have that level of healthcare. It's been amazing. I texted my doctor. She drew up morphine and there's another anti-nausea drug. So I went up to the hospital and had that. The nurse at the time said, look, I'm just going to have to give this to you and go, because they only have 2 RNs on at a time. So managing a ward plus an emergency and then plus me, I was sort of shown the door pretty quickly. And that's okay. Most of the time
Most of the time you're managing it and you're just managing it.
I could go home and sleep it off.
But it sounds like this time wasn't quite that way.
No, this time was a little bit different. I came home and my pain levels didn't change. It was just this gnawing pain. I couldn't sleep. I rang the hospital back. They were still dealing with this emergency, with this situation. You know, it can take the flying doctors quite a while to actually, you know, come down to Bordertown or down this way. Obviously, there was a patient that needed to be airlifted out that night.
Right.
So they were dealing with that patient. The nursing staff didn't really want to deal with me. I tried to explain that I was in trouble and that I thought I had a bowel obstruction. And she advised to take some more pain relief, so endone on top of that. And then I tried to sleep that off. But yeah, it was just a really long, uncomfortable night. And I knew that I was in a lot of trouble by the early hours the following day. So I asked my husband to, take me to the hospital.
Why did you feel it had escalated even further?
But just pain that I could not manage myself. So none of the pain relief touched the sides. I just had this nausea, and I had this new symptom that I hadn't had before, which was, it's not very nice, but I had this like belching kind of response in my body. And I just thought, wow, that's a little bit different. Yeah, feeling very bloated. I knew from the pain I was experiencing, you know, might have been on the pain score, a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10.
Wow. So what did you do? What happened? Your husband took you back to hospital that next morning?
Yeah, he just took me to the hospital. I can't remember if he rang or not, but he's like, you have to go now. So he took me. I got hooked up with my normal drip and pain meds and whatnot. I still couldn't get comfortable. And my doctor had asked for us to go to Narracourt, which was an hour south of us. And I just remember how excruciating it was driving from home to the hospital, which is 4 or 5 minute drive. It was excruciating. I could hardly sit in the car. I was in so much agony. And just the thought of having to get to Narracourt, which was an hour drive, I could not even imagine it. And I knew I was unwell. I knew that I needed to get to Adelaide. So I actually took matters into my own hands a little bit. I was able to get in touch with the IBD nurse at the Royal Adelaide Hospital, and I was able to share some of the symptoms I was having with her and the troubles I was having, because my GP wasn't available that morning. I think she was busy with something else. She just wanted me to get an X-ray and see what was happening in there. But I just knew that, no, I had to go to Adelaide.
It's interesting how we just sometimes intuitively know when something is really wrong. Like it's, even if you get told, no, it's fine. Sometimes you just know.
Yeah, definitely. I remember the nurse coming into the room, and she said, okay, it's time to go to Narracourt now. And I said, oh, actually, I'm going to go to Adelaide. And she said, oh, how are you going to Adelaide? And I said, oh, well, the IBD team in Adelaide are organising a flying doctors to come and get me. Oh, no, I think I said, oh, I think the flying doctors are coming to get me. And she said, oh, I don't think you can organise your own flight. And I said, oh, sorry, the IBD team have organised it from the RA. So they're going to just take me straight to Adelaide. And then from there, the team advised that I needed to have a nasal gastric tube. So what was happening was, because of this bowel obstruction, your body continues to make acids and things like that. And none of this could actually work through the bowel.
It can't go anywhere.
No, it comes up. And you can start feeling it up through the stomach, and even as far as I would imagine as far as the esophagus. And that's where the burping and the belching comes from. So you're literally filling with these acids that you can't digest or can't get rid of. And it's very uncomfortable.
Oh, wow.
So they had a nasal gastric tube, and the nurse had a go in putting it in, because what they needed to do was decompress my stomach. So what happens is all those acids and everything needs to come out. That didn't go so well. I'm not sure how many nasal gastric tubes they need to fit in Bordertown. Probably not that many. But the first attempt didn't work. And then the second attempt, they had a nasal gastric tube. I think it was a pediatric one, though. It was a smaller tube. And the doctor was able to fit that. And as soon as she started as soon as she started decompressing my stomach, which is basically it's a suction, I felt immediate relief. My pain went from a 10 down to a 5. No other pain relief could actually reduce that. But yeah, just that decompression of my stomach, it just worked immediately. Made me a lot more
Wow,
comfortable.
that's really interesting. So, I mean, that almost proves that it's an obstruction, doesn't it? Because it means
Yes.
that it's like a pressure valve and it's just building and building and building and building and building down there, and there's just nowhere for it to go. Wow. So, okay, did the RFDS show up?
Yeah, they had another patient to pick up in Mount Gambier, and then they came via Bordertown to pick me up. There was a bit of a delay. So here in Bordertown, at the time, our ambulance service was completely run by volunteers.
Yeah, that's not uncommon.
Just
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
So volunteers from Keith, from the neighbouring, Keith is about 50 kilometres away. They had to come and do my transfer. At that point, I was feeling a lot more comfortable. I was like, can't my husband just drop me off at the airport? But they came and picked me up, and the plane had been waiting for me for some time. We actually heard it come in from inside the hospital.
Have you been on an RFDS plane before?
No.
Could you tell me about that flight? What was it? What do you remember of it? What was memorable?
I was still feeling very unwell, and I was still experiencing a lot of pain, but I just thought, oh, wow, this is a lot of fuss. It's quite overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no,
they'd been sitting on the tarmac waiting for me. I was amazed by it. It's like a hospital with wings.
Exactly. It's exactly what it
It's
is.
incredible. Yeah, it was quite a comfortable flight. I was amazed at how quickly that flight can get to Adelaide. I think I was able to have a little nap on the way, but I think it only took about an hour. It takes 3 hours by car. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just remember flying into the city, just thinking, wow, this is such an incredible resource that we have.
When you got to Adelaide, the Royal Adelaide, did they whip you in and give you an X-ray or CT scan or whatever and say, oh dear, that you have an obstruction? What did they do?
It wasn't immediate. In fact, it was at a time where ramping.
Oh no. For those listeners who don't know what ramping is, it means when there's insufficient beds and insufficient capacity to take new patients in. How long were you sitting waiting to get in?
About 6 hours.
Holy moly. And were they managing through the nasal tube?
The paramedics I had, one was had been a registered nurse as well. So he was able to decompress, continue that in the ambulance, and they were also able to give me some pain relief as well. It wasn't the most comfortable place to rest,
No.
but they were just wonderful. And once I got into emergency, it was really quick. I was up in the ward very, very quickly and getting ready for another CT scan and more testing. So, yeah.
That scanning, I presume, showed that there was an obstruction?
Yes. So there was an obstruction. So I was in hospital for a few days, fasted for a few days. That inflammation came down. So there was no, my obs were all stable, thankfully.
And then they take you in for surgery. And what do they do in that circumstance where you've got a patient who's got Crohn's and there's so much sort of scar tissue and inflammation and so forth in the bowel? How do they manage that with the obstruction?
Well, actually, they sent me home and I had another couple of months on exclusive EEN again, so those protein drinks. So I had to wait for surgery. They didn't want to use steroids to bring that inflammation down. They wanted to use that EEN, the exclusive internal nutrition, to reduce the inflammation before I had surgery.
So does that mean that it wasn't completely blocked, there was still a way for liquid to get through? Is that what that means?
So after I fasted for a few days, it did resolve itself.
Okay.
It resolved itself. But I was put on a strict liquid diet. There was no solids at that point, that they were out.
Shoot me forward then to a few months and you have the surgery. Tell me, what did the doctors say in terms of the way forward?
Yeah, so I met with the colorectal team. They agreed, let's do the surgery. Keyhole surgery. It's supposed to be very simple. They just remove the section that is diseased and they take it out. They cut another small hole and take it out and then join the two ends back together. So they actually took out that whole section in the valve between the small bowel and large bowel and connected my small bowel to the top of my colon.
Wow.
Yeah.
Aren't
It's
they
amazing.
clever surgeons, these
Yeah,
people?
just incredible. So it's supposed to be keyhole surgery. Well, it was keyhole surgery, but the section of bowel that was so diseased, they actually had to cut about a 10 centimetre cut above my belly button to be able to get this diseased piece of bowel out. So even though it was keyhole surgery, yeah, I still had quite a large scar.
I presume you then don't need to have a bag or whatever. Can you still function essentially
Yeah,
the
I
way the
think,
bowel normally works?
yeah, I was told that, I might not ever be the same again. Like my digestive system might not work the same again. The recovery after surgery was terrible. So I had a complication called ileus, which means my bowel paralyzed itself. Bowels don't like being touched, apparently. So it completely paralyzes. And that experience was, it was just an awful recovery. So I fasted for 10 days, I think it was. Had to have a nasal gastric tube, very similar to having a bowel obstruction. I had a nasal gastric tube put back in, and I still had to be aspirated because my bowel was not able to pass anything because it was paralyzed.
Wow.
But I didn't need an ileostomy, a bag, or they could just sew the two ends together. But the problem was I just had to wait for that bowel to wake up.
When was this surgery?
May 2024.
How are you today?
I'm very well. Unfortunately, so I recovered quite quickly once I came home. So I'd had a couple of weeks in hospital recovering from the surgery. Once I got home, I recovered quite well. Once it took me a while to get back onto a normal diet. So I continued on with these protein drinks for some time. But yeah, very, very well. Unfortunately, I have had a reoccurrence of Crohn's. So I did have a follow-up colonoscopy, and there is ulceration coming back in that joint where I've had the surgery. It's not causing me any dramas yet. So, I'm able to live a very, very normal life now. It's been just so wonderful. Back to hiking, and I'm trialing a new drug. Yeah, feeling quite confident that it will put me into remission.
Has it changed your perspective on life at all in terms of this diagnosis and the whole journey you've been on?
Yeah, definitely. It's been a hard road. Now that I'm well, I don't want to miss out on anything. I've always been that type of person that just wants to live life to the full.
It's interesting how we really don't value good health until we don't have it. And
That's
then,
right.
yeah, and then when you're well, you really come to appreciate, I'm here, I'm well, let's do things with the family. Let's do
Yes.
things with, let's hike, let's do things that we enjoy while we can.
Let's go back to enjoying life.
Yeah, yeah.
I do find joy in, the small things in life, I really do.
That's good. Have you managed to hook up or network with other people that have IBD? And do you have like a bit of a peer support group at all?
I'm in a couple of Facebook groups, but everyone's journey is just so different.
But I think that that diversity is also a good thing. I do suggest, reaching out to whatever communities that exist. Because I think you'll find there's so many people like yourself, V, that are out there that are going through their own journeys, and just knowing that there's other people that are experiencing similar. It's great to be able to talk to those people and provide support when they need it, and they can provide you support when you need it.
Yeah, definitely. There are a couple of people I know with IBD, and it has been invaluable actually connecting. I mean, their stories are a lot different to mine, but it has been so invaluable connecting with them. And
you're right about it affecting everybody. So I have a close family member that suffers from IBD, and just a little while ago last year we went out shopping, and she suddenly urgently needed to find a toilet, and just due to her circumstances and her age and so forth, and there was no toilet anywhere nearby, no public toilet. And we dashed into a retail store, and I begged the staff member there, who was like a 20-something, shop assistant, and I said, please, you have a toilet. Could my elderly family member please just use the toilet urgently? And she said, no, it's against shop policy. And I was just, I thought, gosh, we really need to build a little bit more empathy and understanding for people that are managing health conditions. It's something that they can't always control, and just a bit of kindness goes a long way, So I just think, the more we can talk about things that we don't normally talk about.
Yeah, that's right.
The more we can talk about it and make it okay, I think the better it is. Do you think that living in a rural area like you do has made it more challenging to manage your IBD?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. We're very blessed that I've got such a great GP here. You know, once I was part of that IBD clinic, outpatients clinic at the RA, that changed everything.
Yeah, being connected up at the tertiary hospital makes a huge difference.
It's a huge difference, yeah. That was life-changing, yeah.
That's great. Do you have any advice for anybody else that is suffering from symptoms that they don't understand, or maybe they've been given a diagnosis of inflammatory bowel disease? Do you have any advice for them?
Definitely don't leave it as long as I did to get a diagnosis. It's the longer you go without managing inflammatory bowel disease, the more damage you're doing as well. You've got scar tissue building, and definitely, yeah, if something's not right, get a referral for a colonoscopy,
Right.
for further testing, and don't hold off. Don't leave it too long.
Thank you so much, V. I really appreciate coming forward and telling your story. I wish you and the family the very best, and keep us posted. I would love to hear any updates and know what's happening there in Bordertown. And keep safe. There's many fires at the moment, so stay safe.
Yeah, thanks, Lana. I really appreciate that.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with family and friends, and subscribe and follow, and then you'll never miss the next adventure. For all the details on how you can share your story with us, join our Facebook group and donate to the Royal Flying Doctor Service. Check out the show notes for details. The Flying Doctor podcast is recorded on Ngunnawal land. It's produced by Sophie Campbell, edited by Mandy Coolin, and I'm your host, Lana Howarth. Catch you next time.
Hey, thank you for listening to this episode, and thanks again to our major sponsor and major national partner, Isuzu Ute Australia. Isuzu Ute is committed to supporting the communities in which the RFDS operates. To learn more, search Isuzu Ute online.